The cafe was busy that afternoon, filled with the usual mix of people. Some were typing on laptops, focused and serious. Others were chatting quietly with friends, sipping their drinks and enjoying the warmth of the place. It was the kind of cafe where people came not only for coffee but for a break from the noise of the world outside. Among all the faces there was one that seemed almost invisible. She moved between the tables with careful steps, carrying plates and drinks, always polite, always quiet. Most customers barely noticed her. To them she was just another waitress, part of the background. Someone who served their coffee and disappeared. Her hair was tied neatly in a bun, and her uniform was spotless. She had a calm way about her, never in a hurry, never raising her voice. Yet there was something about the way she moved that suggested she was paying attention to everything. Noticing details others didn't, she would see a cup left slightly crooked on a table and fix it without anyone asking. She would catch a spill before it could stain the floor. But despite all this, people didn't see her. She smiled politely when someone spoke to her, thanked them when they tipped, and then went back to her work. Fading into the background like she was part of the walls, dot in the corner of the cafe, there was a grand piano. It wasn't used much these days. It was polished and elegant with a rich wooden finish that gleamed in the sunlight. Sometimes people would sit and glance at it, imagining what it would sound like if someone played. But the piano was mostly silent now, just a beautiful decoration, a memory of a time when the cafe had live music and people came to hear it every evening. The waitress would occasionally glance at it too, almost as if she wanted to touch the keys but never did. Something about it drew her in, but she kept that part of herself hidden. She moved past it every day, but no one ever knew what she felt when she looked at it. Customers would come in and out, chatting and laughing. Some were impatient, tapping their feet and checking their watches. Others were loud, making jokes and talking over each other. She carried their drinks with steady hands, always keeping her composure. Some people were kind, leaving generous tips and saying thank you. Others barely looked at her, speaking to her as if she was invisible. That's how it had always been. She didn't mind much. She had learned early on that people usually only saw what they wanted to see. But inside, she carried a quiet world of her own, a place that no one could touch. On this particular afternoon, the cafe was filled with a lively energy. Sunlight poured through the windows, creating warm patterns on the wooden floor. A group of people had just walked in, laughing and talking loudly. They were dressed neatly, as if they had just come from an important meeting. They settled at a large table near the piano, their chatter filling the room. One of them, leaning back in his chair, noticed the piano and laughed. "Someone should play that thing," he said, his tone playful. "It's just sitting there looking fancy. Let's see if anyone here can make it sing." The group laughed along, glancing around the cafe as if daring someone to play. No one moved. No one even looked at the piano, except for the waitress. She paused for a moment as she wiped a table nearby, her hand freezing mid-motion. Her eyes flicked toward the piano, and for a brief second a shadow crossed her face. It was a look that no one else noticed, a mixture of longing and fear. She shook her head slightly, returning to her work. The customers at the laughing table barely paid attention to her. They didn't know what was hidden behind those calm eyes, what secrets lived in her heart. She went to refill drinks, carefully avoiding drawing any attention to herself. But the piano kept calling to her in that quiet, insistent way that only she could hear. It reminded her of a past she had buried deep inside, a part of herself she had almost forgotten. She quickly pushed the thought away. No one was supposed to know about that. It wasn't safe to show the world that side of her. Not yet. The cafe owner, a middle-aged man with a kind but practical face, noticed the waitress pausing near the piano. He raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He knew she was good at her job. She didn't need praise. She didn't need attention. That was her way. But today, something was different. There was a tension in the air, almost electric, though no one else could feel it. The group near the piano was still laughing, making more jokes about the music and how easy it must be to play something beautiful. One of them even said, "I bet no one here could actually make a sound worth hearing." The words were careless, meant as a joke, but to the waitress they cut deep. Not because she doubted herself, but because they didn't know what they were missing. They had no idea that she carried years of practice, years of music, hidden like a secret treasure. She continued moving through the cafe, serving drinks and clearing plates. Her hands were steady, her face calm, but inside her heart was racing. Memories of long hours spent at a piano came flooding back. A smaller piano from her childhood. A piano in a school auditorium, a piano in a music hall. She remembered the first time she touched the keys and felt music flowing through her fingers. She remembered the applause, the joy, the feeling of being alive in a way that nothing else could match. And now, here she was, working in a cafe, carrying trays and wiping tables, while the piano in the corner sat silent. It almost seemed unfair, but she reminded herself that she was here to do a job, not to perform. She had chosen this life, even if it wasn't easy. She had chosen to hide herself away, yet, even as she worked, she couldn't ignore the piano. Every so often she would glance at it, feeling that pull in her chest. It was like a whisper, telling her she still remembered how to play, telling her that she wasn't as invisible as she thought. The customers, busy with their own conversations, didn't notice. They laughed and joked, completely unaware that someone who could change the mood of the room with a single note was moving quietly around them. The contrast between her hidden talent and her current life made her feel both sad and strangely powerful. She was invisible, yes, but she held a world inside her that no one could touch. The group near the piano grew louder, teasing and joking about the music again. One of them nudged another and said, "Hey, maybe the waitress can show us what she's got. Bet she never played in her life." The words hung in the air. They weren't meant to be cruel, just a joke. But the cafe seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Other customers looked briefly at the piano, wondering if someone would respond. The waitress stopped for a moment, her hand hovering over a tray. Her chest tightened. Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Should she walk away, ignore it, pretend she didn't hear? But part of her, the part that had always loved music, the part that remembered the thrill of performing, whispered softly, "This is your moment." Even if they don't know it yet, she swallowed, forcing herself to focus on her task. She carried a cup of coffee to a table and placed it down carefully. "Here you go," she said softly, smiling. The customer looked up, nodded, and smiled back, unaware of the storm inside her. As she walked away, her gaze flicked toward the piano again. The group near the corner was still laughing, joking about how no one would play. And then, for the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a spark of possibility. Maybe today wouldn't be just another day of being invisible. Maybe today could be different. She continued her work, clearing plates and refilling drinks, trying to calm her racing heart. The cafe owner watched from a distance, sensing that something was about to happen but not sure what. He trusted her completely. He had seen her handle every busy afternoon with grace and skill. But even he didn't know the story behind the quiet eyes and the careful movements. He didn't know that behind that calm exterior was someone who had once lived a life full of music, someone who had been praised and applauded for her talent, and someone who had chosen to hide it away for reasons she hadn't shared with anyone. As the afternoon went on, the sun began to shift, casting long shadows across the floor. The group near the piano grew restless, their laughter louder now, drawing glances from other customers. Someone made another joke, teasing about how the piano was just a fancy decoration. And then, almost imperceptibly, the waitress paused mid-step. Her hands were steady on the tray, but her mind was elsewhere. She looked at the piano one more time. The sunlight fell across its polished surface, and for a moment she saw not a piece of furniture, but a world of possibilities, a world she had almost forgotten existed. She remembered what it felt like to make people stop and listen, to feel their emotions move with every note. And for the first time in a long time, she wondered, could she do it again? Could she show the world what she had hidden all these years? The cafe hummed with life around her, oblivious to the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. She carried on, moving from table to table, serving drinks, smiling politely, appearing calm. But inside, the music was already stirring. The keys of the piano called to her, promising a moment that could change everything. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if she would play. But for the first time that afternoon, she allowed herself to imagine it. Just a note, just one note, and the world might see her differently. The spark had been lit, and no one in the bustling cafe noticed that a quiet storm was building, one that could change every. The afternoon moved slowly, but for her, every moment felt heavy with memories. As she carried trays and refilled cups, her mind drifted to a life that felt like a lifetime ago. She remembered a small room, sunlight streaming through lace curtains, and the sound of a piano filling the air. Back then, music had been everything. She had spent hours practicing, perfecting every note, every chord, every piece that came to her hands. There was a joy in it that nothing else could give her. It had been a part of her identity, the thing that made her feel alive, the thing that made people notice her for who she truly was. But life had changed. Life had a way of pushing people into corners they didn't want to be in, corners where dreams had to be put aside. And so she had stopped playing, or at least she had stopped in public. Her family had struggled, and she had needed to find work to help. She had taken the cafe job because it was steady, because it was quiet, and because it let her survive without asking for help. Music had become a secret, a memory she kept tucked inside her heart. She rarely thought about performing for anyone, and yet the memory never faded. She would sometimes catch herself tapping an invisible rhythm on a counter, or hearing a melody in her head that no one else could hear. And sometimes, just sometimes, the piano in the corner of the cafe would call to her, reminding her that she hadn't lost herself entirely. She moved past the tables, carrying coffee and pastries, smiling politely at customers who barely noticed her. But her eyes kept drifting toward the piano. It sat there silently, its polished surface gleaming under the afternoon light, almost daring her to sit down and play. For a moment, she imagined what it would feel like, to press the keys and hear the music flow from her fingers, to let the sound fill the room and touch the people around her. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She had hidden her talent for so long that showing it again felt impossible. And yet, the pull was there, like a tide she couldn't fight. She remembered the last time she had played in front of anyone. It had been a small recital, her parents sitting in the front row, smiling proudly. The applause had been loud, real, and warm. She had felt like she could do anything. But life had a way of interrupting even the brightest moments. Family problems, money troubles, and a series of events she couldn't control had forced her to leave the music behind. She had thought she was giving it up for good, that the world had no place for someone like her to play anymore. And yet, here she was, standing in a cafe with a grand piano in the corner, and the same feelings she had once known so well were coming back to her in waves. The customers at the tables around her talked and laughed, unaware of the storm inside her. Some of them were lost in their phones, scrolling endlessly. Others were chatting with friends, enjoying the warmth of the cafe. A few glanced at the piano, curious, but quickly looked away. The group near the corner was still talking loudly, making jokes about the piano as if it were nothing more than decoration. They didn't know what they were missing. They didn't know that someone who could change the mood of a room with just her hands was moving quietly among them. Invisible to the world, her mind drifted to her childhood again. She remembered the small piano in her family's living room, the worn keys that had seen so many years of practice. She remembered the long nights spent alone, practicing scales and songs until her fingers ached and her eyes were heavy with exhaustion. She remembered the feeling of accomplishment when she finally mastered a piece, the pride in her parents' eyes, the warmth of a teacher's praise. Music had been her world, a place where she felt safe, a place where she mattered. And now it was a world she could only visit in memory, a world that felt both close and impossibly far away. The cafe owner glanced at her, noticing the way her hands moved more slowly than usual, almost as if she were lost in thought. He didn't say anything. He knew better than to interrupt her when she was in one of her quiet moods. She had always been reliable, always careful, always polite. He trusted her completely, even if she didn't say much. But today, he could see a tension in her that he had never noticed before. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of something unspoken. A spark that made him wonder if something was about to happen. As she moved past the tables, she noticed a young child staring at her curiously. The child's eyes were wide, innocent, and unafraid. For a moment she smiled, feeling a small connection in the middle of her swirling thoughts. Children, she thought, were the ones who noticed things without judgment. They saw the world in a way adults often forgot. The child's gaze reminded her that there was still a world outside her memories. A world where people could be surprised, could be moved, could feel something real. The group near the piano continued their playful teasing, unaware of the effect it was having on her. "I wonder if anyone here could actually play a song," one of them said, laughing. "I bet the waitress couldn't even find middle C." The words were casual, meant as a joke, but they touched something deep inside her. She paused, her hands gripping the tray a little tighter. For a moment, she imagined what it would be like to show them, to prove to herself that she hadn't lost everything. The idea made her heart race, both with fear and excitement. Could she really do it? Could she play again after all these years? She carried on with her work, trying to push the thoughts away. But they wouldn't go. Every time she looked at the piano, her mind went back to the small lessons, the long hours, the feeling of music flowing through her fingers. She remembered how it had once made her feel free, powerful, and alive. She remembered how people had listened to her, had been moved by something she had created. That memory was both painful and comforting. It reminded her of what she had lost, but also of what she still had. Buried deep inside. As the cafe began to fill with the late afternoon crowd, the sunlight shifted, casting long shadows across the tables and the floor. The piano gleamed in the corner, almost glowing in the warm light. She moved past it again, unable to resist its pull. She could feel the music calling to her, whispering that it was still there, that she hadn't forgotten, that she could still play. Her hands itched to touch the keys, but she hesitated. Doubt and fear held her back. What if she failed? What if she couldn't remember? What if people laughed at her? The questions crowded her mind, but underneath them all, there was a quiet determination. She had spent so long hiding that part of herself, pretending it didn't matter. But it did matter. Music had been her life, her passion, her escape. And now, standing in that cafe, with the piano waiting silently, she realized that hiding it forever wasn't the answer. She didn't know what would happen, but she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to reclaim a piece of herself. To show the world what she had kept hidden all this time. The customers continued their conversations, oblivious to the quiet storm inside her. The group near the piano was still teasing, still laughing, still unaware of the gift sitting just steps away. She paused by a table, setting down a cup of coffee carefully, and allowed herself a small breath. Her fingers brushed against the tray, then tightened into a fist. She could almost hear the music in her mind, the way it had sounded when she was young, the way it had filled a room with life. That memory was enough to make her heart race, enough to make her hands tremble slightly. She moved back toward the kitchen, carrying dishes and trying to calm herself. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and memories. She remembered the applause, the smiles, the feeling of pride. She remembered the long nights of practice, the struggle, the pain, the joy. All of it came rushing back, and for a moment she felt dizzy with emotion. But then she took a deep breath and reminded herself that she was still here. She was still capable. She was still herself. And maybe, just maybe, the world was ready to see her again. Even if she had forgotten how much it mattered. The cafe owner noticed her pause, a slight hesitation as she moved past the piano. He didn't say anything, but he watched closely, sensing that something was about to change. She walked past the tables again, her heart pounding, and felt a quiet thrill run through her. The piano was more than an object now. It was a bridge to her past, a reminder of who she had been and who she could still be. The music wasn't just in the keys, it was in her, waiting to be set free, and in that moment she allowed herself to imagine it. Just a note, just one note, and the room could be filled with something real, something beautiful. She didn't know if she would play or what the reaction would be, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to find out. The invisible waitress, unnoticed and quiet, felt a spark of courage. The piano in the corner waited patiently, as if it had known all along that she would come back to it, that she would remember what it meant to truly be alive. The cafe had started to quiet down a little as the afternoon moved toward evening, but the energy near the piano had grown tense. The group that had been joking earlier now seemed more curious, nudging each other and glancing toward the silent piano. They laughed quietly, trying to seem casual, but there was an edge to their teasing. "Come on, someone should play," one of them said. "Even a little song would be nice." The words floated in the air like a challenge, harmless on the surface but carrying an unspoken pressure. The waitress froze mid-step, carrying a tray of drinks. Her fingers tightened around the handle, her heart beating faster. The piano was right there, gleaming in the corner, almost daring her to sit down. She looked toward the group and then back at the piano and felt a rush of memories. Years of music practice, of notes learned by heart, of hands moving across keys in a world where she felt free and alive. All of it came rushing back in a flood. She wanted to walk away. She wanted to tell them she couldn't play, that they had the wrong person. But a small, stubborn part of her whispered that this was her moment. Whether she liked it or not, she carried the tray to a nearby table, trying to focus on her work, but every movement felt heavy. Her hands trembled slightly, and she could feel the weight of all the eyes, some curious, some impatient, on her. Even the other customers in the cafe seemed to notice the tension. A few glanced toward her, sensing that something was about to happen, though they didn't know what. The cafe owner watched silently from the distance, his brow slightly furrowed, sensing that this quiet, invisible waitress was on the verge of doing something extraordinary. The group near the piano continued to tease lightly, not realizing the effect they were having. "I bet she's never touched a piano in her life," one of them said, half laughing. "Can you imagine?" Another added, "Yeah, she probably wouldn't even know where Middle C is." Their laughter was easy, casual, not meant to harm. But to her, the words felt like a challenge, like the world was testing her. She swallowed hard, taking a deep breath, feeling the pulse of adrenaline through her body. She had kept her talent hidden for so long, never showing anyone. And now, it seemed, the universe was giving her a choice. She set the tray down carefully and walked toward the piano, her steps slow and deliberate. Every nerve in her body was alive with tension. She was terrified, yes, but also exhilarated. The memories of her past performances, small recitals, school competitions, even quiet evenings at home playing for herself raced through her mind. She had almost forgotten the feeling of music flowing through her fingers, of creating something that could make people stop, listen, and feel. But now, standing just a few feet away from the piano, it all came back. The cafe grew quiet as she approached the piano. The group had stopped joking for a moment, sensing that something was about to happen. Other customers glanced up, curious. Phones were raised quietly, people ready to capture whatever might unfold. The waitress paused in front of the piano, her hands hovering over the keys. She could feel the polished wood beneath her fingers even before touching it. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for just a second, and let her memories guide her. For a moment, she hesitated. Doubts tried to creep in. What if she had forgotten? What if her fingers couldn't remember the music? What if everyone laughed at her? But then she felt the music in her chest, in her mind, in every part of her that had once lived for it. It was still there, quiet but strong, waiting for her. She pressed a single key, just one note, and the sound filled the cafe. It was soft, tentative, but perfect. The room seemed to hold its breath. Encouraged by that first note, she allowed her hands to move more freely. The music grew, each note connecting to the next, forming a melody that was both familiar and alive. It was a song she had played many times before, but now it carried all of her emotions: fear, hope, longing, and the thrill of being seen. The notes seemed to float through the air, reaching every corner of the cafe. People stopped talking, their eyes drawn to her, captivated. The group near the piano was silent now, their playful teasing forgotten. They leaned forward, mesmerized, unable to look away. The cafe owner watched, a mix of awe and pride in his expression. He had always known she was special, but he hadn't realized the depth of her talent until now. The sound of the piano filled the room in a way that made the air vibrate, like something magical was happening. Customers who had been typing, chatting, or scrolling on their phones stopped and turned toward her. Even those who had barely noticed her before were now captivated, drawn to the music as if it had a pull they couldn't resist. She played with confidence, letting her fingers dance across the keys. Each note told a story of a life that had been hidden for too long. She didn't think about the customers, the laughter, or the jokes from earlier. She didn't think about anything except the music. It was as if she had entered a different world, a world where only she and the piano existed. And in that world, she felt free. The melody grew stronger, more expressive, filling the room with emotion. Some people had tears in their eyes, moved by the beauty and sincerity of the music. Others leaned forward in awe, realizing that the quiet waitress they had ignored for so long had a talent that could touch the soul. Even the group near the piano, who had been joking moments ago, was now completely silent, mouths slightly open in shock. They had never expected this. No one had. Her hands moved faster, yet every note was precise, controlled, and full of feeling. The music told a story of struggle and perseverance, of dreams put aside and rediscovered. It was a story only she could tell, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was living it out loud. People who had thought she was ordinary now realized they had been wrong. They were witnessing something extraordinary, something rare, and it all came from the young woman who had been invisible just moments ago. The sound of the piano filled the cafe, mixing with the soft murmur of amazement from the customers. Some were wiping their eyes, moved by the intensity of the performance. Others whispered to each other, unable to believe what they were hearing. Cameras and phones captured the moment, but no recording could fully convey the depth of the experience. It was live, raw, and powerful. She was no longer just a waitress serving coffee, she was a musician, a storyteller, a force of emotion and skill. Time seemed to slow as she continued to play. Each note was deliberate, carrying meaning and feeling. She could feel the energy of the room, the collective awe and admiration. The customers were no longer thinking about their drinks or conversations. They were completely immersed in the music. Even the cafe owner, who had seen her work for years, was struck by the transformation. He realized that she had been hiding a part of herself that was more than talented, was her soul expressed through music. As the final notes approached, the melody softened, slowing down gracefully. She allowed the music to linger, letting the last vibrations fill the air. Then, in one final delicate chord, she ended the song. The room remained silent for a moment, as if no one could believe what had just happened. And then, slowly, the applause began. It started quietly, then grew louder, filling the cafe with cheers, claps, and exclamations of awe. People were on their feet, some cheering, some crying, some just staring in amazement. The group near the piano looked at her with wide eyes, their teasing replaced by respect and astonishment. They had no words at first, just the stunned realization that they had misjudged her completely. Other customers crowded around, asking her questions, wanting to know how she had learned to play and praising her talent. The cafe owner approached, his face filled with admiration and pride. He thanked her, telling her she had changed the entire atmosphere of the cafe, and that he had never seen anything like it before. She sat back for a moment, her hands resting on the piano, breathing heavily but smiling. She felt a mix of relief, joy, and a little disbelief herself. It had been years since she had played like that in front of people. And now she realized something important. She had not lost her music. It had always been a part of her, waiting patiently for the moment she was ready to share it again. The cafe buzzed with excitement as people continued to talk about the performance. Some were taking photos, some were recording short clips, but all were filled with a sense of wonder. The invisible waitress had become the center of attention, not because she wanted it, but because her talent demanded it. And for the first time, she felt seen not just as a waitress, But as a person, as an artist, as someone who had something valuable to give the world, she rose from the piano slowly, smiling at the people around her. Their faces were filled with admiration and curiosity. The group who had teased her earlier approached, sheepish and apologetic. They admitted they had been wrong, that they had underestimated her completely. She nodded politely, letting the music speak for her. She didn't need to say anything. Her performance had said it all. For the first time that day, she felt a deep sense of pride. She had faced her fear, stepped into the spotlight, and shared a part of herself she had kept hidden for so long. And the world had responded, not with judgment or ridicule, but with awe, respect, and genuine admiration. In that moment, she realized that sometimes the best way to be noticed is not to seek attention at all, but to let your true self shine. The cafe had fallen completely silent now. Every person in the room was focused on her, and she felt the weight of their attention pressing down on her shoulders. Her hands hovered over the keys for a brief moment, feeling the smooth wood beneath her fingers, feeling the pulse of the music waiting to be unleashed. It was one thing to play quietly for herself, to let music fill an empty room in her mind. But this was different. Now the music had a life of its own, and it wanted to speak through her. She took a deep breath and let her fingers fall onto the keys. The first notes were soft, almost like a whisper, delicate and tentative. But even that whisper carried power. The cafe seemed to lean in, holding its breath. Conversations had stopped, phones had been lowered, and even the hum of the espresso machine faded into the background. It was as if the world had condensed into that one moment, and the only thing that existed was the music and the girl, who had been invisible just moments ago. Her confidence grew with every note. Her fingers moved like they had never stopped, flowing across the keys with a natural ease that only comes from years of practice and passion. The melody was gentle at first, a story unfolding slowly, like a quiet secret being told for the first time. Then it grew stronger, more expressive, more alive. Each note carried emotion, and the room responded. People leaned forward, their eyes wide, captivated by the sound that seemed to touch something deep inside them. It was more than just skill. It was feeling, soul, and story woven together in a way that made everyone listening pause and reflect. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others whispered to each other, unable to believe what they were hearing. The group near the piano, who had been teasing her before, now watched in stunned silence. They could not take their eyes off her. Their laughter and casual confidence had evaporated, replaced by awe and admiration. She didn't notice the crowd. She didn't think about their reactions or the comments. For the first time in years, she was completely immersed in the music. Each chord and note carried a memory, a feeling, a part of her story. She thought of her childhood piano, of long nights practicing when the house was quiet, of the applause she had once felt. She thought of the struggles that had brought her here, to a quiet cafe where people had ignored her for years. And she let it all pour out through her fingers. The music became more complex, more powerful. Her hands flew across the keys, creating harmonies that filled every corner of the room. The cafe seemed to vibrate with the sound, the notes echoing off the walls and ceiling. People gasped, some even whispered, and a few had tears in their eyes. They could feel the emotion in every note, the depth of her talent, and the courage it had taken to step forward and play. She had transformed from a quiet, unnoticed waitress into a musician who commanded the attention of everyone around her. Without a single word spoken, the group near the piano finally found their voices, but they were soft, almost reverent. I didn't know she could play like that," one whispered. Another added, "I thought she was just a waitress. I had no idea." Their words were filled with surprise, awe, and a little guilt. They had underestimated her completely, as had everyone else in the cafe until now. And now there was no denying the truth. She was extraordinary, and they had been blind to it. Her music told a story all its own. It spoke of resilience, of dreams buried and rediscovered, of a life that had been paused but not forgotten. Every person in the room felt something personal in the notes, something that resonated with their own memories, hopes, or regrets. Some held their hands to their hearts, moved by the raw honesty of the sound. Others leaned forward, captivated, unable to look away. The music transcended the room, creating a connection between her and everyone listening, a connection that no words could ever achieve. Even the cafe owner was affected. He had seen her work hard every day, but he had never realized the depth of her talent. Watching her play, seeing her pour everything she had into the music, he felt a mix of pride and humility. He realized that she had been hiding something precious, something that could inspire people, something that could change the energy of an entire room. He could see it now, crystal clear. This quiet girl, whom the world had ignored, had the power to touch hearts and lift spirits. She continued to play, letting her hands move freely, but with purpose. The melody rose and fell, danced and lingered, carrying every emotion she had kept inside. There was fear in the notes, a whisper of the doubts she had faced. There was joy, a hint of triumph, and a celebration of rediscovered strength. There was sadness, too, a memory of the life she had left behind, the dreams she had paused, and the years spent hiding her gift. And woven through it all was a quiet, undeniable hope, a promise that she would never let her music be silenced again. Time seemed to stretch as she played. The cafe faded around her. The customers' drinks, the tables, the chatter, they all disappeared in the background, replaced by the sound and feeling of the music. She didn't notice the minutes passing. She didn't think about the applause or the cameras or the shocked faces. She was alive in the music, and the music was alive in her. It was a conversation without words, a language that everyone could understand, a story that needed no explanation. The melody reached its peak, powerful and breathtaking. Her hands moved with grace and precision, every note perfect yet full of emotion. The room seemed to hold its breath, completely absorbed in the sound. People forgot themselves for a moment, letting the music guide them, touch them, remind them of something they had almost forgotten, the beauty of raw, honest talent, the impact of courage and passion. And then, almost imperceptibly, she began to slow, letting the music settle into its final notes. The melody softened, drawing the room into a quiet, reflective pause. Every person in the cafe could feel the end coming, and it was almost painful to let it go. The last chord lingered in the air, vibrant and full, then finally faded, leaving a silence that was more powerful than any applause could ever be. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one spoke. They were all suspended in the moment, overwhelmed by the beauty, the intensity, and the sheer humanity of what they had just witnessed. And then the room erupted. Clapping, cheering, exclamations of awe filled the air. Some people were on their feet, clapping loudly. Others were wiping tears from their eyes. Phones were raised, capturing a moment that words could never describe. Everyone, without exception, wanted to celebrate the woman who had transformed a simple cafe into a space of wonder and emotion with nothing but her music. The group near the piano, who had once been teasing, now looked at her with admiration and respect. Their previous assumptions had been shattered. I didn't know," one whispered, shaking their head in disbelief. Another added, She's incredible. I can't believe I underestimated her." Their faces reflected a mix of awe, guilt, and newfound understanding. They had learned a lesson about judging people too quickly. And it was a lesson they would not forget. The waitress finally stepped back from the piano, her hands resting on the keys, chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. She smiled softly, almost shyly, aware of the attention but feeling strangely calm. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not just as a waitress, not just as someone in the background, but as a person, as an artist, as someone who had a gift that mattered. The room had acknowledged her talent, her courage, and her humanity, and in that acknowledgement, she found a sense of validation and pride she hadn't felt in years. The cafe owner approached, clapping his hands lightly, eyes shining with pride. "That was unbelievable," he said. "I've never seen anything like it. You've changed this place and everyone here can feel it. Thank you." His words were sincere, filled with admiration. She nodded, a quiet smile on her lips, letting the music speak for her once again. She didn't need to explain herself. Her performance had already told her story, her struggles, her talent, and her triumph. People continued to talk excitedly, sharing what they had just experienced. Some were asking her questions, others complimenting her, and a few were still staring in awe, unable to believe what had happened. Cameras captured the moment, phones recorded the sound, but nothing could fully convey the energy, the emotion, and the life that had been poured into every note. It was a moment that would stay with everyone present forever, a memory of a quiet woman who had revealed a hidden brilliance that could move hearts, and through it all, she felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. She had faced her fear, embraced her talent, and shared a part of herself that had been hidden for too long. She realized that hiding her gift had kept her safe, yes, but it had also kept her from fully living. Now, she had taken the first step back into the world she had once loved. A world where she could inspire, move, and touch the hearts of others. The applause continued, heartfelt and genuine, and the cafe hummed with a renewed energy. People who had ignored her moments ago were now talking about her, praising her, and showing respect for the talent that had been invisible for far too long. She stood quietly, letting the moment sink in, aware of how much she had accomplished in just a few minutes of courage. And for the first time in a long while, she believed that she could step forward into the future with her music. No longer hiding, no longer invisible, the piano sat silently. The room was still buzzing from the performance. The applause had slowly died down, leaving a lingering energy in the cafe that felt almost electric. Everyone present had been touched, some deeply, some quietly, but all had been affected. The customers who had once ignored her now looked at her with a new sense of respect. People who had joked or underestimated her moments ago were now silent, realizing they had been completely wrong. And through it all she stood quietly by the piano, hands still resting lightly on the keys, heart racing and a small, shy smile on her lips. The cafe owner approached her, his expression a mix of pride and admiration. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "That was incredible. You've changed the whole atmosphere of this place. Everyone here has been completely captivated." I never knew you had this talent." She smiled softly and shrugged, not used to such direct praise. For years, she had hidden this part of herself, believing it didn't belong in the world she now lived in. And yet, here it was visible, undeniable, and breathtaking to everyone who had seen it. The group that had teased her earlier walked over cautiously, their faces a mixture of awe and embarrassment. We had no idea," one of them said quietly, almost ashamed. "We didn't mean anything by it, but this is amazing. I've never heard anything like it." Another added, "We were so wrong about you. That was incredible. You should be performing, really performing, not just this." They gestured vaguely at the cafe, as if to say that the ordinary surroundings could never contain her true talent. She nodded politely, unsure of how to respond. But inside she felt a small spark of pride and possibility as the applause and chatter died down. A man who had been sitting quietly in the back finally approached. He was older, well-dressed, and carried himself with a presence that suggested he was used to being in the music world. He had been watching her carefully, listening to every note, and now he stood before her, smiling. "You have something extraordinary," he said simply. "I've heard many musicians in my time, but what you just did, that was rare. Truly rare. You've been hiding a gift, and it would be a shame if the world never got to experience it." Her eyes widened slightly, a mix of surprise and disbelief. No one had ever spoken to her like this before, recognizing her for what she truly was. The cafe had slowly returned to a normal rhythm, but the energy had shifted. Customers who had once been focused on coffee or conversation were now lingering, whispering about what they had just seen. Some were still recording clips on their phones, trying to capture the moment, but no recording could truly convey the emotion, the skill, and the courage she had shown. People were sharing their reactions quietly, admiring not only her talent but also the way she had stepped forward despite fear and hesitation. It was a reminder that true talent and bravery often live quietly, unnoticed, until someone dares to reveal them. She took a seat at a small table near the piano, her hands folded in her lap. Her body was still buzzing from adrenaline, her mind racing with thoughts she hadn't had time to process. The world had changed in just a few minutes. She had stepped into the spotlight, not seeking it, and the world had responded in kind. For years, she had felt invisible, as though her presence didn't matter. But now, she realized that her gift had always mattered. It had been waiting for the right moment, for the courage to let it shine. The man who had approached her earlier sat down across from her, speaking in a calm, encouraging tone. "Have you considered performing more publicly?" he asked gently. "I understand if it's not something you want, but what you did just now, it deserves to be shared. People would be inspired by your music. I would be honored to help you find a way to perform again." She felt a mix of emotions, fear, excitement, disbelief, but beneath it all was a quiet hope she hadn't felt in years. She had almost forgotten what it was like to dream, to imagine a life where her music could touch more than just her own heart. She thought about her past, the years she had put aside, the dreams she had hidden, and the moments she had missed. And yet, she also realized that none of that time had been wasted. Every note she had played, every hour she had spent practicing, had led her to this moment. She had been ready, even if she hadn't known it. The music had never left her. It had been waiting, patient, until she was ready to embrace it again. The cafe owner approached again, standing near her with a proud smile. "I want to apologize," he said sincerely. "I should have seen this talent long ago. You've been amazing every day, but today you've shown us something extraordinary. If you ever want to perform here, I would be honored to have you. The cafe has always been quiet, but now it feels alive in a way I've never experienced before." She smiled softly, touched by his words. It was strange to hear recognition after so many years of invisibility, but it was also comforting. She felt, for the first time, that she truly belonged in this moment. Word of her performance spread quickly. Some customers left the cafe and shared their experience online, talking about the quiet waitress who had stunned everyone with her hidden talent. Others told friends and family, recounting the moment with awe. Even people who hadn't been in the cafe that day soon heard about her, and curiosity grew. It was a gentle ripple at first, small but insistent, and it promised that her life was about to change in ways she had never imagined. She sat quietly, reflecting on the experience. For so long she had hidden her gift, thinking it wasn't needed or wanted. She had lived a quiet life, serving drinks and cleaning tables, always polite, always unseen. But that afternoon had shown her something important. Hiding from the world didn't erase her talent or her value. And revealing it, even in a small, unexpected way, could create moments of beauty and connection that were worth more than anything she had ever imagined. The man who had spoken to her earlier offered to meet again, suggesting ways to bring her music to a wider audience. She felt a nervous excitement. Part of her wanted to run away, to return to the safety of her quiet routine. But another part, the part that had always loved music, urged her forward. She realized that this was more than just a performance. It was a turning point. It was a chance to reclaim a piece of herself she had almost lost, and to share it with the world. As the cafe slowly returned to normal, she found herself smiling more easily. The customers were chatting, laughing, and enjoying their drinks, but something had changed. Even the regulars who had known her for months and barely noticed her now looked at her differently. They had witnessed her brilliance, and it had shifted the way they saw her forever. She was no longer just the quiet waitress, they had glimpsed the artist within. And that made all the difference. She walked through the cafe, collecting dishes and tidying tables, but her movements were different now. She felt lighter, more confident, as though the music had lifted a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. People greeted her with smiles, some still whispering compliments, and she nodded politely, grateful but humble. It was strange to be seen in this way, but it was also deeply satisfying. She realized that recognition wasn't about ego. It was about connection, about sharing something meaningful with others. Later, as the cafe began to empty, she sat near the piano once more, letting her hands rest lightly on the keys. The polished wood glimmered under the soft lighting, as if acknowledging her presence. She thought about what had just happened. The courage it had taken to step forward, the way the music had filled the room, the reaction of everyone who had been there. It was overwhelming, yes, but it was also a reminder of why she loved music in the first place. It had the power to move people, to create a bond that words alone could never achieve. She realized something important in that quiet moment. Life was not about hiding who you were, even if it felt safer that way. Life was about embracing your gifts, even when it was scary, and letting them shine. The music she had kept hidden for years was part of her, and sharing it didn't diminish her, it elevated her. It allowed her to connect with people, to inspire them, and to remind herself of the joy and fulfillment she had been missing. The cafe owner came over one last time before closing. "I hope you understand," he said softly, "that what you did today wasn't just a performance. It was something extraordinary. You've inspired everyone here, and I hope this is just the beginning for you." She smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where her music was no longer hidden, where her talent could reach beyond the walls of this small cafe, where she could truly live the life she had almost forgotten she wanted. As the lights dimmed and the last customers left, she stood by the piano one final time that evening. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, remembering the music, the applause, the awe in the faces of those who had witnessed her talent. She knew that this was only the beginning. Her life had changed in ways she could barely comprehend, but she also knew that she was ready. Ready to embrace her music, to step into the world with confidence, and to never hide her talent again. She walked out of the cafe that night with a quiet determination. The streets were calm, the air cool, and the world around her felt full of possibilities. She had faced her fear, shared her gift, and been seen in a way she had never been seen before. And as she walked, she